IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, welcome to today's episode. I'm Sridhar Krishna, and I have with me Pranay Kotasthane, also from Takshashila Institution. And we want to talk today about some of our institutions that we've got in India and maybe the ones we don't have as well, right? So Pranay, when I was reading a report recently, it's called the Edelman Trust Barometer Report, published in 2021. So it's probably not as recent, but maybe from last year. But Indians, this survey was conducted by polling around 33,000 people across 28 countries. And of all those countries, Indians seem to be the most trusting in its institutions. This question was asked around what is your trust with respect to government, NGOs, businesses, and media? And people said the Indians seem to be the most trusting. And that to me was quite an eye-opener. It was also quite shocking. It seemed to be at variance with everything that I seem to believe in and think of. So for instance, justice takes very long in India. Cases keep pending in courts for many, many years. There are over 4.7 crore cases pending in various courts across the country. And this is not some data I've made up. This was presented in Parliament in March 2022. And there is a big difference between the election promises made and policies which are implemented. So slogans like Garibi Hatao was there when we were growing up, to things like promises of Achhe Din, which are being made now. And you see actions which are at complete variance with stated intentions, right? When questioned, they're all just called jumlas and dismissed as statements which are made in the heat of elections. Law-abiding citizens are always very cynical about the support that they can expect from the police. And every day there are cases foisted against NGOs. NGOs are all given a bad name by various people. The media is often accused of partisanship, and it's very hard to distinguish between fake news and real news. What do you think? Do our institutions need strengthening, or is our trust in our institutions absolutely well placed?
Yeah, quite a paradox, right? That we trust our institutions, but also look at it the way it is. This question was placed. It is a comparative analysis, right, of NGOs, medias versus the government, right? But not government per se. Like there are elements within the government. If you look at the broad spectrum from legislature, executive, judiciary, there are some institutions within this framework of the Indian state which are more trusted and some of them which are less. So there are various such surveys. Actually, the Takshashila folks had done one way back in, I think, 2014-15. And they had found that most of the people, when you divide the state into its components, a lot of people had expressed trust in Election Commission and Supreme Court. They saw those two institutions as being largely impartial, strengthening the Indian Republic, etc. And police was one institution where people expressed the least amount of trust amongst the options and given. So that was way back in 2014-15. It would be interesting to do that now, see how maps out. But broadly, then this is a paradox, right? See, the Indian state is present where it shouldn't be. So it is everywhere and it is absent where it should be, right? So many people haven't seen what the state can do when it actually provides for public goods, it corrects market failures, etc. Right? So largely we are used to the state which we've seen over the last 50, 60 years, which tries to do a lot of things, also comes and gives you some handouts towards close to the elections, etc. So I think we are used to it in one way, and it is still the mindset that the state is the ultimate thing. My bap is still a strong thing, So I guess from that framework, compared to the other institutions that are there, the state still shows good rating as a whole, right? So it's just a conjecture. I don't know what the real.
Yeah, it's fantastic what you say about the election commission, and I think I'm a big, I agree with that. I was in Ladakh way back in 2004, and I was hiking somewhere with my wife and daughter, and completely in the boonies, right? I mean, like there were hardly any people anywhere. And we went from one village which had 10 homes and spent a night there. And then the next night we spent in a village with 2 homes. Then on our way back, we came across a man carrying a bag on his back, along with another gentleman who was walking alongside him. He looked like a government official. And there was one guy carrying something on his back and walking along. And then I figured out who these were. I mean, this was an election officer who was going to this village which I just left with 10 people. And he was going there and he was going to conduct elections, collect the votes, and head back. Right? It was, absolutely remote, every remote corner of India. I mean, elections do take place and people get to vote and their votes get counted. And yeah, from that perspective, there is something to be proud of. But what do you think? Do you think like, is this great? Is it just about strengthening some of our existing institutions to make it even better and function even better? Or is there something more that you think needs to be done?
Yeah. So first, on the election commission point, the way you were describing it reminded me of the movie Newton. Don't know if you've seen it. That it shows that there are people, there are elections held even in the remotest corners of India, but there are still issues with it. But anyways, that movie is one of my all-time favorites. But that is definitely true that, I mean, election, the way Indian state is able to, again, paradoxically do good things which require immense capacity in mission mode, right? So basically things which are less discretionary but high transaction intensive and spread across the continent, we are able to do, right? So polio vaccination is another example. And election commission is another example. Another less discussed success until now has been the delimitation commission. So now the next one, I don't know how it will map out, but the problem of gerrymandering, which is often talked in the US, real problem, we don't hear about it that much, right? So that's an indication that delimitation is more or less working as it should. This was an insight one friend had shared many years ago, keenly observes politics. So I think, yeah, delimitation commission is another probably, a successful institution. But yeah, the mostly when we think broadly about institutions, people generally think in terms of institutions that aren't working well and were supposed to work, and of which we have many, right? Like the whole litany of institutions which are not working so long that we'll have to do a 24-hour podcast. But so I'm not going to discuss that. One question I had in mind always was, hey, we know there are some institutions which are not working, but are there institutions which are missing? Like we don't even have them, right? Because clearly we formed the republic 75 years ago, and world has changed. There are new challenges. The republic also has experienced newer things. So there have been new institutions to mitigate some of those things, right? Like GST Council, one in such. But so I was thinking, are there other things which are missing in this entire jigsaw puzzle which we haven't even thought about? So it's not about things which aren't working, but things don't exist at all. So that was where I started. And yeah, I came up with an incomplete list of three. And yeah, I would love to know what you think and what our listeners think, and if they have anything to add to that.
Yeah. So why don't you tell me? I mean, see, I can think of one which I think is probably missing in our as an institution, because when I look at India's great ills, and the first thing which comes to mind is corruption. And when you look at corruption and you figure out like the root cause of all corruption is election funding and the need for election funding. And then, like, when political parties go out and get money for election funding from large businessmen and others, then there is a price to be paid. And that price comes down in terms of favors that these people will dispense to those people who funded them. And then there's no going back, right? So if we can have an institution which funds elections more centrally, is there a way out of this morass that we all find ourselves in? I think that's something that I've always wondered. Is there a better way for funding elections? Is there room for an institution that can ensure that people get money to fight elections and pass on their message and not have
That's
to depend on private
that's
funds?
an interesting thought, but I wonder whether you need an institution for that. In the sense that, first of all, yeah, I mean, when we talk about corruption, people will talk about Lokpal, and there have been many attempts. But again, the question there is who guards against the guards, right? Like police is the police.
Yeah,
So those kinds
exactly.
of questions come up. But on this, yeah, for example, if all the instead of an institution, if we have a legal mechanism which mandates all the finances of political party to be made transparent, no, none of these sealed envelopes business and all, I think that itself would make things clear. I don't think corruption can be brought to zero in any society, right? Like corruption is like the cost of bringing it to zero is infinity, marginally. So I would say you want to reduce it, and if there are transparent mechanisms of declaration, I think that is something which would go a long way to reduce it to an extent. Yeah.
Yeah. So coming back to your question, Pranay, and I think we'll have a short break and then we'll come back to your views. I know that you have some interesting thoughts on the missing institutions in India. Yeah. Just let's take a short break.
Hello. It's been another great week here on the IVM Podcasts Network. On Think Fast, Varun and Suchita discuss Ola's fall, Dream 11's rise, and Sheryl Sandberg's exit from Meta. On The Wire Talks, Hindi poet Ashok Vajpayee tells Siddharth why our government should not promote any language. On Big Talk about tiny humans, Devi Shobha and Meghna talk about postpartum depression. On the Musafir Stories, Saif and Faiza explore Aurangabad with Sagar Senapati from Travel Safar Aur Hum. And on Hanswani, hear the story Gopal Ko Kisne Mara, a tale of the loneliness that comes with old age. We've got some exciting news for you. IVM Podcast has just launched its merch, and our first line is out now. Head to the IVM Podcast's website and click on the shop tab to check out our first collection of t-shirts. Do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any platforms you're listening on. And you can also check us out on YouTube. We're also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and advertising on the network. We would really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it in. It helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week. SBI Life Insurance, Apne Liye, Apno Ke Liye. Jupiter, a digital banking app. Capgemini, get the future you want. Intel vPro, built for business. And Intel, future banao wonderful with Intel powered laptops.
Yeah. So welcome back. And yeah, Pranay, over to you. You were telling us about the ideas that you have about the missing institutions.
Yeah. So just to clarify, I was thinking of meta institutions in the sense I'm not talking about sectoral regulators for X, Y, Z or sectoral regulators for cryptocurrency, etc. And right there might be many new institutions of those kinds which require to be. But I was thinking of what are the institutions which will improve the functioning of the overall republic, right? And not just one particular sector. What would those be? Was the question I was thinking about. So I came up with three, not in any particular order, but let me just speak about them. So one was Parliament's own think tank. So one thing is that, first of all, our parliamentarians are doing multiple roles together, right? They are being also treated as, there is an MP lad scheme. They are supposed to provide services, but their main function finally is to represent their constituency in the House of the People or in the Council of the States, right? So basically, that is what their main purpose is. That's why that position exists in the first place.
Mhm.
But what do we do for them to be able to discharge these functions? Nothing at all, right? Like Indian MPs are not assigned any research budget or any research personnel. Okay. And then you also have this new problem of the anti-defection law, which effectively means that the MP does not have has to toe the line of the political party, right? So the major flaw I see it that political party has way too much power in our institutional system, right? So all these are ways in which you can reduce the power of the political party. So the first one is to have a parliament think tank where MPs can actually do research, come up with well-informed outputs. First of all, they are able to understand some of the issues better themselves, right? So these are really intelligent people. They have won elections, so their grasping power is immense. But obviously, we not if someone is not interested or doesn't know about, say, defense pensions issue. There
Correct.
should be a research department which is non-partisan, which is well versed with all the problems of evergreening pensions, and they are able to do some projections, give them analysis, etc. Right? So that
They can't
kind
even
of
ask the parliamentarians today are in a position to, I mean, forget about the fact that they can't vote against their party line. They are not even in a position to have an intelligent conversation in parliament because they lack the budget or the resources to perform research on those topics and ask intelligent questions or even present their point of view or even try to modify the law in a way that is suitable. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. So there are ways out of it. There are still some MPs who are motivated, so they do have their own. They hire research personnel and research whether from their own salaries. There are also some like some of our colleagues have been have deposed before standing committees, and they have said some parliamentarians who know the issue better explain it to the others in the group. And then there is something called the PRS Legislative Research. It's a 17-year-old non-profit organization that does fantastic work in providing independent and non-partisan research. So some workarounds we've found. But I think this is one big gap that we need one institution which can work at an India scale, right? So for all parliamentarians, once you have 1,000 parliamentarians in the new parliament, to the state governments, etc., we need to have a much bigger research think tank. And I would say
absolutely.
that something that is paid out of the Consolidated Fund of India, so that one, there is this idea of non-partisanship. And second, there are people who have developed deep expertise in specific. So I have been to the Congressional Research Service office once. So
Mhm. In the
uh,
US. Yeah.
in the US. So that
Yeah.
is the equivalent that I'm talking of in India, right? And the CRS has more than 600 people. And I
Wow.
have met some of the people who are, who have spent 15, 20 years just working on South Asia or just working on India and Pakistan, right? So imagine the amount of knowledge that they have accumulated, and they are able to give really good advice to their parliamentarians, right? It's not whether what should be done, but just the background information about, what has US support to Pakistan been like on, say, on after a 2001 Afghanistan war. What has it been over these 21 years, right? So
Mhm.
these days, immense expertise. There is a lot of value which can be brought out by an institution like this. So that I think is one big thing. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely awesome. The idea that you have parliamentarians who go in, who are being voted to power, they fight elections, they spend a lot of money getting there. And then once they get to so called power, they actually find that they have no power. They are to just toe the party line, and they have no resources which are available to research and find out and discuss and understand the laws that are trying to be passed, or for being able to work towards understanding what kind of policy initiatives will make an impact on in the way that they seek to. And having a fund, which is a think tank, which is funded by the Consolidated Fund of India, sounds like a very interesting idea. And it's but they do have some small things, right? Pranay? I mean, like the other day I was talking to a colleague who did this GCPP course along with me, and he said he's now a LAMP scholar. So basically, he's a legislative assistant to a member of parliament, and his job seems to be to do some of the work that you're talking about in terms of doing research. But I think it's a very small fund which provides hardly any resources for them to do very much. But but it's
Yeah.
still it's so beginning.
LAMP is run by PRS Legislative Research, which I spoke about. So
Right.
there are lots of people who provide legislative assistance now. But yeah, these are people who are really in the beginning of their career. They're just starting out. They work for 2 years with their, say, a parliamentarian, and then they will go for a further
Yeah.
education. Right. So that's good. There is a place for that. But I'm saying over and above this, we need
Correct.
someone who's spent their considerable time. There are people in CRS who are PhDs on that topic and who they are working with the government for 15, 20 years, understanding what an issue is. So that kind of, have tuning. LAMP fellows can also work with them, but I think you need a government funded India scale institution is something.
Cool. That sounds like a brilliant idea. But you mentioned three, Pranay, and you got two more to go.
Yeah. So the other one was something called the Independent Fiscal Council. So this gap has been highlighted by the last three finance commissions. So again, I think one major part which you mentioned, it is finally about money, right? How is money used and how is it channeled? So now one of the problems that we have is all manifestos of all parties sound pretty much similar on the major issues, and all of them make really hefty promises, right? And once they have made hefty promises, and some of them come to power, they realize some of them in reality, right? But do we have any ex ante calculation of what some of the promises of a government will cost or a policy will cost? There is no such institution in India. We have a post whatever analysis done. Once the program is implemented and money is been applied, there is something called the CAG, Comptroller and
Comptroller and Accountant General. Yeah.
also controller sector, they try to look at, okay, if you have done this policy, let's say NREGS, what has been the actual implementation? Has there been financial issues with that, right? So that is all good. CAG is also one of the more respected institutions in India. So that works. There are still improvements can be done, but it is that. But what about before a policy is put in place, right? So there is absolutely no institution which does that in it. That now is another major, and many finance commissions have recommended. I can give you an example, right? Just this one rank, one pension. It was there
Yeah.
in the party manifestos of both Congress and BJP. And once BJP came to power, it was implemented. Still, even now we don't have government telling what is the fiscal cost of this. Can someone tell me how much is it going to cost? How much tax will it lead for us to pay or our future generations? There's absolutely nothing.
So you mean like people can just go ahead and do something? There's no accountability really in terms of, so you can go and just because you have a majority, you can go in and implement a policy and pass a bill, which may or may not be in the interest of the country, and you may not even know whether it's in the interest of the country or not. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think accountability will still rest with the parliamentarians, right? They are our representatives. So which is fine. But just more disclosure on what something is going to cost will help. So there are these independent fiscal councils, and they basically do three things broadly. One, they evaluate the quality of budget forecasts, right? Even that what we budget and what we actually spend can be varying. So they evaluate the quality of budget forecast. Have we actually put money where it was announced in the 1 February nice speech that everyone heard, right? That is one. Second, they develop cost estimates of budgetary proposals. If someone is saying OROP, then okay, what would be the cost? What would be the benefits kind of thing? And three, they monitor if fiscal rules are being adhered to, right? So if we are saying that we need to meet 3% fiscal deficit target, or if we have to meet a certain ratio on debt GDP, are we meeting those kind of things? So there is a lot of countries now have these independent fiscal institutions, and generally the experience has been positive. That has led to better evaluation, etc. So there are a lot of studies. Dr. Govind Rao has written about it in a couple of places, but I think there is a lot that can be done. Two other examples. One is the Congressional Budget Office in the US, and a similar office exists in Australia. There are others in Belgium, Chile, etc. And generally, the experience has been positive. So I think this is another institution which we are missing. Finance commissions have recommended it, but obviously, who wants to be accountable or more.
Exactly.
But I
Yeah.
think
Nobody likes to be questioned. I think those are some of the problems are also because I think the first one around Parliament's own think tank along the lines of Congressional Research Service. I think that's an idea which I can see getting implemented given the will. I mean, if people say, okay, if somebody can build a case for it and take it forward, I think it's possible. The second one about independent fiscal council, I think governments don't seem to be, it doesn't seem to be the interest of governments to have these things questioned a lot before the bills get passed. Because today, with governments coming to power with brute majority, they think that you don't need to have a discussion about laws in parliament.
Sridhar, I
If
would
you have,
add that,
yep,
Overton window has moved in a positive direction here because, like as earlier, there was no talk about this at all. But
yeah,
now the Finance Commission, which is a constitutional body, has made this
yep,
recommendation.
yeah.
Then the government even accepted that, but wanted to formulate a fiscal council, which was reporting to the Ministry of Finance, which was effective. How will they evaluate Ministry of
Correct.
Finance
It would not be independent at all. Yeah, absolutely.
salaries, right? So, but you see, there is already a change in terms of being talked about within the government, right? So, I think if we keep pushing towards it, there will be iterations, etc. But it
Sure.
could become a reality.
Absolutely. And what is your third one?
Yeah, so this
Right.
comes from, Dr. Govind Rao has written this book, Studies of Indian Public Finance. So again, it's a public finance missing institution. So here I am doing a bit of a cheating in the sense that there are other institutions in India which do this kind of function, but they are defunct or don't work well at all.
You mean
So
the National Development Council?
yeah, so this I'm talking about institutions which can do institutions for intergovernmental bargaining and negotiations, right? So we have many governments, right? More than 2 lakh
Yeah.
plus governments if you include all local bodies. But if you look at state governments, what are the bodies within which states can talk to each other, and states can also represent that case to the union government? What are those bodies, right? Those don't exist. The Rajya Sabha is supposed to do that job. It no longer does. Again, because of the predominance of the political party. Planning Commission used to do this in a suboptimal way because Planning Commission finally meant that a plan was developed by the union government. State governments were forced to become agents to implement that plan. So it in a sense at least gave that a way for the states and union governments to talk to each other, but it was done in a extremely suboptimal way. So that was, and then there is interstate council, national development council, etc., which are no longer functioning the way they. So as a result, there are no institutions that can actually do cooperative federalism, which is always talked about. But where is it? Like which institution enables that? Let's say some states have to come together and say that, hey, union government, we pay so much taxes. States as a whole need to get more money as untied funds for us to implement their own schemes because all social infrastructure is finally covered by the states. Right? There is no such institution. Finance Commission exists, but Finance Commission gives a recommendation and then goes away. It will not do this RKP function after it gives the report.
It has no teeth. Yeah.
Yeah, so it will give the report, it dissolves. So actually, either you can make Finance Commission a permanent body, have a permanent secretary, or you have a fresh body which actually has this role of doing this intergovernmental bargaining and negotiation. I think that is a third institution which is missing. And this idea of delimitation, or with this idea that there is a divide between one part of the country and the other, there is a need for us to have this kind of institution.
So tell me this, don't you think, I mean, you're talking about adding institutions and, we've all grown up with the sense that, India is a very bureaucratic nation and this bureaucracy sort of gives us an impression of a bloated, oversized government. So is the Indian government not already oversized or do you have a different point?
The Indian state is not at all oversized. And that's the weird thing, right? Because the Indian state does lots of things. That's why it interferes in every aspect of our lives. but the core functions which it is supposed to do are completely understaffed. So there is a very nice paper, I think I would have spoken about earlier, by Devesh Kapoor on why does the Indian state both fail and succeed. And there's a nice chart in it on how big the Indian state is. So even if you include all public sector units in the Indian state, still, let's say compared to the US, etc., are developmental functions, like the core functions, policing, judiciary, health, education are heavily understaffed. Like even if you normalize for the numbers of US and India, there we are like 1/3 the size. So the problem is not that the Indian state is too big in terms of the number of people. The problem is that the Indian state just wants to do everything and there are no restrictions. But if you look at the developmental functions, we all know, right? We are shortage of police, shortage of judges, which you referred to. So actually, we do need more institutions. Like these are not these institutions are needed to make our republic well. So to not have them will be like being penny wise pound foolish.
So brilliant. Thank you very much, Pranay. This was very enlightening. For me, like a couple of things that in the Indian, the last thing that you said that the Indian state and government is not Indian government is not large and it's not oversized. And there is a need for many more institutions. And I think it's a good beginning, this conversation. And hope to have many more. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Do you find yourself in a room full of people talking about investments and insurances and feel left out? Do you also want to understand how to spend your money wisely? Then you have come to the right place. Welcome to SBI Life Presents A Sip of Finance, a women-exclusive podcast where we break down difficult financial topics into simple and straightforward episodes with your host, Priyanka Acharya, a finance expert who's been in the industry for 14 plus years. And not just in English, but in 7 more languages. So tune in every Tuesday for fresh episodes on the IVM Podcast Network and all major podcast streaming platforms.